this episode of the Business Communicators.
You have to understand that, especially in a crisis situation, everybody's time becomes even more valuable than it is on a normal day, because everybody's got decisions to make and things to do. So it's up to me as a meteorologist to be able to give a concise explanation as to what's happening.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Welcome to Season 5, Episode 8 of the Business Communicators. My name is Austin Staton. In just a few moments, Kim Davis and Thomas Bain are going to join me for a conversation with Matt Lanza from Space City Weather and the Eyewell. He's the foremost expert on all things weather, specifically hurricanes that are going to impact the Gulf Coast. He's based here in Houston, also works in the energy sector, and it's going to be a fascinating conversation on the intersection between weather and communications. It's one that I hope you enjoy and that I hope you share with friends and families that could be in the path of a hurricane or a major storm this year. But as always, we want to encourage you to follow all of the work that we do. So just search at Biz Communicator on all of the social media platforms. You'll find us there. You can also visit our website, thebusinesscommunicators.com. And of course, if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, just go ahead and shoot me an email, austin@thebusinesscommunicators.com. But without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Matt Lanza. So it's time to sit back, relax, and be informed.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Now, if you've listened to the Business Communicators for quite some time, you know that Thomas and myself generally talk about the Houston weather and how ridiculous it is, whether it was the freeze, whether it's hurricane season. And I always have to remind Thomas that we are not a weather podcast.
What a killer talk.
But today we are. I'm a weather nerd. I love RadarScope, love the app. I've done a lot of cool interviews with people in the past, and I've never gotten nervous or anything like that. And then I was at a gym and saw Frank Billingsley, who's a reporter or news guy here in Houston. And I was
meteorologist.
Like, meteorologist. Thank you. And I was so nervous to go up and say hi. And this was like 6 months ago. So anyways, we are bringing on a weather guru right now, and that is Matt Lanza. And if you know the name, you're very familiar with Space City Weather. And as of June 1st, the Eyewell, which is bringing you weather coverage on hurricanes. So Matt, I think you've got like big shoes to live up to for this episode, since we are weather nerds and we are comms. Yes. So welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, hopefully I can fill the shoes with all the good weather information. It's just fun to talk about, right? Everybody talks about the weather.
Oh yeah, it's fun for me when friends like text me and they're like, "Hey, can you give me some insights here?" And I'm like, send them a GIF from RadarScope. But anyways, we're really glad to have you on this episode, and just to kind of get into your background a little bit. I know you graduated from Rutgers. You spent time up in the Northeast before moving down here to Houston. Kind of walk us through your journey, how you got into, meteorology, and kind of the start of both Space City and the Eyewell.
Yeah, sure. I'm one of the weird people that's kind of known what they wanted to do since I was, 4 or 5 years old and stuck to it. I always had an interest in maps and in weather. And so kind of, having the Weather Channel as a kid and all that really made it, I think, accessible and approachable to me and interesting. And so I loved it from day one. I was given a reading a forecast in my kindergarten class one day when I was, in kindergarten, and it just kind of grew from there. And so I went to Rutgers, like you said. They had a meteorology program there that was just close enough to home, but not too close that I, could go there and stay there. And then like a lot of meteorologists, when you're coming out of school, you tend to think that you've got three choices. You can go into the National Weather Service, you can go into broadcast media, or you can go into research. And I chose to go the broadcasting route because I had a couple of internships, and I really liked communicating weather. So it took a little bit of time, but I got hired and moved to Upstate New York. So spent about almost 5 years up there, just enough to make up for all the snow that I missed out on growing up in southern New Jersey, which is kind of on the wrong side of what we call the rain snow line up there. We got more rain than snow usually. But I had some big time winters when I was in upstate New York, dealing with lake effect snow and stuff. But I got impatient, waiting for, the next broadcast job to kind of open up. I didn't want to stay in Utica, New York forever. And so I actually shifted gears early in my career into the energy industry. and moved from Utica to Los Angeles in 2009. Worked for SoCal Edison, which is a major utility out in Southern California. Did weather forecasting for them and helped them to determine how much energy they were going to need on any given day because of the weather. Generally the relationship between energy use and weather is very strongly correlated. And so that kind of made Houston a natural fit ultimately. And so that's where I ended up, worked for an investment bank here in Houston. Now I work for Cheniere Energy, which is a liquefied natural gas exporter. And I help them with weather risk and weather information and things like that, and how weather's going to impact energy demand, all that good stuff. But having that passion for communicating weather information sort of led me to kind of want to continue to dip my toes into it a little bit more. And that's how I got hooked up with Eric Berger of the Houston Chronicle at the time through a mutual friend. He was looking for somebody to help him write some weather forecasts. I was like, sure, I'll do it. And so I worked with him for a little bit there, and then he left for Ars Technica. And that was when Space City Weather started. He's like, I've got this following that I've built up for however many years. Like, I would like to continue a weather blog. Do you want to join me in it? I'm like, sure, let's do it. And then, Space City Weather had their nice little following until Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And then it just exploded and went from a side thing to, oh, wow, now we have a responsibility. So, yeah, I mean, the growth has been incredible. It's been a lot of fun. And sort of from that, we decided this year that we were going to launch this site called the Eyewell, because we were a little frustrated with how hurricanes are covered nationally. And we feel that there's a better way to do it. And we want to apply the way that we cover Houston weather to other hurricanes. I think during Hurricane Ian in Florida last year, it was sort of a wake-up call to me. I have some family in Tampa, and I was watching the forecast and how everybody was focused on Tampa. And I'm talking to a friend of mine. I'm like, yeah, this thing's going to go south of Tampa. And nobody was really like harping on that until the last minute, it felt like. And so we want to just do it a little bit differently and cover all the storms the way we cover Houston weather. And we'll see if we can survive a couple of hurricane seasons doing both.
Yeah, knock on wood if you're listening to this right now. But I like that you have the energy experience, because I'm in the same boat. I worked at BP for about 10 years, and we had an in-house meteorologist, Dr. Ed Bracken, and he would send out reports on a daily basis, especially during hurricane season. And it was incredibly valuable. When I actually joined TC Energy almost a year ago, by the time you're listening to this episode, that was the first thing I asked for. I was like, do we have any hurricane alerts that go out or weather newsletters that go out? If so, I want to be on it. But kind of on that note, Hurricane Harvey in 2017, I remember one of the first alerts that we got internally at BP was probably 7, maybe 8 days out. And it said, we don't know that this is going to be a crazy strong storm, but we're anticipating it to be slow moving and to create a lot of rain. And as we know, Houston at that time had been through 3 or 4 500-year floods in a short amount of time. So immediately, I go to the grocery store, get a few things and pack a go bag just in case anything happens. And I remember finally making the decision to leave and go to Dallas. It was the night the storm had made a landfall. And I asked my roommate at the time, because our apartment had flooded during Tropical Storm Allison. I asked him, I was like, Alvin, do you want to come with me? And he was like, no, I was born in Houston. I'll die in Houston. And then he texted me like 2 or 3 days later and was like, Austin, someone's looting your room right now. But anyways, to get to that whole sidetrack of the story, one of the things that I respect about Space City Weather and the Eyewell, and also the internal news alerts that we had while I was at BP, is that it was straightforward information. It wasn't trying to scare you. It was trying to give you the warning, but not create panic. And that's something that you're very adamant about, is not creating that hype. And you make that abundantly clear on all of the content that you guys put out. Why is that important for you, to be able to control that message and control that narrative, to let people know that you have to be calm, but you should take this seriously?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's definitely it is our mantra, we're no hype weather. And what I've learned over the years of doing this, both in broadcasting and in business, which has actually been great, having both those experiences really ties in, like you learn what works real quick. And what I've learned is that people don't want to be bothered about things that aren't that important, right? If it's going to rain, in Houston, it's going to rain. There's going to be days when there's a flood. we just want to let people know about that. We let people be aware that, hey, there's probably going to be some street flooding today, something like that. But that's going to happen a few times a year. But what we really need to do is kind of reserve our energy for, hey, this is the big one. With Harvey, it was getting people to really just understand that this was not going to be like anything that we had recently dealt with or anything that we had dealt with since probably Allison. And getting them to understand that and expect that. And so what we do is by being kind of, we like to joke and say that we like to be boring most of the time. By doing that, we earn the trust of our readers that we're not going to scare them. And when we do amp up the language and the messaging and being clear about things, then they realize, wait a minute, these guys are being a lot more serious about this than I'm used to. Like, I think I need to take this more seriously. So you kind of build that goodwill and that trust, through the calm days to kind of cash it in when what hits the fan. And it seems to work, and it resonates with people, and they like it, and they know that, like, we're not going to be there to pester them on days when we don't need to pester them. We're not in this to try and generate clicks and page views and stuff like that, which I don't know if that's a great business strategy or marketing strategy, but it works to keep our audience at least. And we don't really lose people, and the people that use us really do appreciate us. And it's been fun to watch it grow.
I think the boy who cries wolf comes to mind about let's scream about it, and then nobody does anything. And all of us either being in crisis management or crisis comms in some form or fashion in our previous lives or current lives understand that, it's a good day when some of our messages get ignored because it means it's boring. And I'm intrigued at how weather and business has kind of come together, because I got really intrigued in weather and hurricanes, particularly during Katrina, because I was actually working for a hospital in Austin, and we took a bunch of evacuees there. And then when I had opened up a brand new hospital as a project coordinator, and then when Ike was set to hit Houston, all of a sudden we got to be able to take children for the children's hospital. And I was the guy running the numbers, being like, all the forecasts I'm seeing, we have the ability to take these customers. I'm glad we set it up, but we should be able to go fine. And then I drove to Houston to write it out. So shows you my intelligence level there. What is your take on how companies are using weather in the energy industry, healthcare industry, any industry, and where do you see the future of that kind of going?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, back when I was talking about my career, I said, like, when you come out of college, it's government, broadcasting, or academia research. And now it's different. Now you've got government, broadcasting, academia research, but there's also the private sector. And that's the space that I've sort of built my home in and that I like, because you quickly see the value of forecasts when you're working in business, and you see how important it is to people to understand, how the weather is going to impact their operations, their costs, et cetera, et cetera. And, what I see a lot of meteorology jobs now kind of being is you're more translating information. Like we speak two different languages. Like, I speak the language of weather, but I can also translate that into a business language. So, like, okay, I know what the weather is going to do. What does that mean for operations? And I can tell people, what that means. And what I've seen in the last, I want to say 5 years, a lot more job openings in private sector companies. I've seen companies like AT&T, Amazon, hiring for meteorologists to have in either their crisis centers, their security centers, whatever, because they understand now that weather is a real risk to their everything. I mean, that's just the reality of how it is. And so that they're hiring these meteorologists in-house, I think, is great. There's a lot of companies out there that cater to businesses and that have a staff of meteorologists, but they also have a lot of clients, right? So if you have someone in-house that can really just understand the business, your specific business, and where your pinch points are, I think it's really helpful. I'm a big proponent of, like, let's get more meteorologists and more positions. It's good for the industry. And I think it's really good for everyone, really, to have people in these positions, because businesses make better decisions.
So, Matt, how long has it been? I mean, have you seen since you saw the shift where more private companies were getting like their own meteorologists? And can you also speak to some of the ways it makes a big difference to have your own in-house person as opposed to just turning on the news at 6 and seeing what they say?
Yeah, I want to say, so the energy industry, I think, really kind of led the way on this. I want to say back in the early 2000s, there was a big push to get more in-house meteorologists. And, still there were not a lot of companies that did it, but the ones that did, I think, recognized the value in that. I think you had some like hedge funds and investment funds that were doing it, and they were making a lot of money on positioning themselves because of the weather. I think the real big one was Enron. They had multiple meteorologists. They built a whole weather desk. I think there's books written about how they did that before obviously that went awry. But starting kind of in that late 90s, early 2000s period is when companies sort of recognized this. And as time has gone on, I think we've proven time and again that it's good to have that expertise in-house, when possible. Not every business can afford that, obviously. So, you can't expect every business to have a meteorologist, but the big ones should, I think. And most of them, a lot of them do. And it's just different because, having the in-house meteorologist really understands the issues specific to that business that, no one that can just turn on the news and put two and two together can really understand. Like, yeah, you can make assumptions about it, but to really understand, where is that hurricane going to track relative to our facilities? What's in the path? Where's the severe weather risk relative to where we have locations? All these things that the meteorologist can kind of take off the plate of everybody else, so everybody else can work on making the decisions around that. I think it helps save energy and save some time and ultimately make the response more efficient and effective from a business standpoint. At least, everything I've seen over the years has tended to prove that to me. And I only feel it's something I felt strongly about when I started, but I feel even more strongly about it having gone through, Harveys and Sandy's when I was dealing with a New York office, all these different events. It's a big deal.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up? Do airlines have their own meteorologists? It seems like they would. No, seriously, it seems like they should all have their own.
Yes, and I think most of them do actually.
Okay.
They actually have staffs of meteorologists in house.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I guess the problem with them goes beyond that. Like, they make good forecast calls, but there's all these other logistical issues that kind of pop up in terms of scheduling and where aircraft are and logistics, and they've improved. Like, I can't even imagine how bad the last couple of years would have been without having meteorologists and staff, because it inevitably would have been worse than it's been.
I want to kind of echo that kind of sentiment, because I remember reading something during COVID and lockdown and when flights weren't flying, that there wasn't as much information. And the added joke is I could be wrong so many times and still be a weatherman. But are there any sources of where you get your information to kind of build your models and your forecast models, and then follow it up? What's the best spaghetti model? But that's another story. That's the nerd in me kicking in.
Right. No, so I mean, like, we mostly use government assets. The GFS model is an American model. It stands for Global Forecast System. It's run by NOAA and the National Weather Service. All that is taxpayer funded, so it is available in the public domain, so anyone can see it. European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting produces their own model. We use that. We use models from other governments, Canada, the UK. I think Japan has a model. Like, they're all over the world now. And so what we do is we take all that information and we sort of synthesize it down to, understanding what impacts our location based on what the model's showing, and B, what are the model's biases? Like, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of a heat wave, and I can tell you that the models have been atrociously too hot in terms of the forecast temperature this week, but it hasn't really mattered because it's felt that hot, right? So the models may actually be wrong, but they're actually doing kind of a good job in forecasting what it feels like outside. So that's good, because that's the real human impact of things. But I mean, like, during COVID, we were missing airplane data, which I think almost certainly impacted the model. Like, these models ingest everything: satellite data, aircraft data, surface data. Twice a day it goes into these models. They run their equations, and then they spit out an outcome. And it's all about trying to get that 0.0 right, that initialization point. Because if you can't get that right, the whole model gets thrown off. And that's the butterfly flapping its wings chaos theory. It just kind of takes over in the model, and it just goes off the rails. So, everything that's done in terms of modeling is, yes, improving how we run the model, but really improving how that snapshot looks. And it's gotten better and better. And as far as what the best spaghetti model is, well, there's no good answer to that. Because what I would have told you a few years ago is the European model is great. It does the best job. It's excellent. And the last 3 years, it's been horrible during hurricane season. So, there's no good answer to that question.
I was actually really curious to hear what you were going to say on that, because for me, my bias has always been the European model seems to be more consistent, at least on tracking. But that's interesting. But I kind of want to pivot back real quick, because we were talking about the communications, the business aspect. Obviously, for your job, it's kind of like engineers, right? Like engineers are going to give you the most complex answer to a solution or something like that, and you are dealing with complex scientific terms that a lot of the general public doesn't understand, and so you're able to simplify that message and deliver it whatever vehicle you use. But during a crisis situation, I think back to Harvey again, there was a lot of cross collaboration that was taking place between business, between government, between first responders, meteorologists. How important is it for meteorologists to understand how to communicate, and what practices have you learned to be able to collaborate best with those various agencies?
Yeah, it's the best thing to do is you have to understand that especially in a crisis situation, everybody's time becomes even more valuable than it is on a normal day, because everybody's got decisions to make and things to do. So it's up to me as a meteorologist to be able to give a concise explanation as to what's happening. Make sure that I cover almost everything I can in terms of how it'll impact operations, how it'll impact people, whatever the outlet is forecasting for, and to also think ahead. And one of the things that I think I did well during Harvey was I anticipated what people were going to ask, so I had answers. I never had I'm not sure, let me get back to you on that. I had an answer. And even if I wasn't necessarily confident in it, I made myself sound confident. So you have to sort of be confident in yourself that you are giving the right answer, that you've looked at this enough that you know what you're doing. But really, the ultimate thing is that you have to be willing to be good with people's time, because it just becomes it shrinks so much during these storms. Like we can't, a business can't function on what the National Hurricane Center timeline is. They're issuing warnings 36 hours in advance of the storm, which is, I guess, fine for the public, although even that's now kind of, I think, questionable. Can we get people out of one area in 36 hours? I don't know that we can. But the reality is that that's what their timeline is. So you have to speed that up and make decisions that maybe that in a scientific world you're not necessarily comfortable with doing, but in an actual real world setting, you have to be. And I think being honest about that, being honest about the risks, that sort of endears yourself to your public, to the officials that you're talking to. People really want to know, all right, what do you think is going to happen? What are the risks? And that's what you kind of try and hit at during these sorts of events. I mean, it was just an incredible thing to go through, because it wasn't just like one thing. Like it was all the things hitting at once. The flooding, the duration, the hurricane aspect. Is it going to redevelop when it goes back in the Gulf? All these things that people wanted to ask questions about. So that was a really good experience in terms of being able to now understand, like, each storm. I can be a lot more concise and brief in terms of how to explain what's going to happen to people.
Two kind of follow-up questions to that. The first one is, the evacuation. Now we know like Katy, Texas will evacuate like 48 hours before a storm comes in. But when it comes to making those decisions to evacuate, I know Judge Emmett was, very instrumental in kind of, the response, and he was very out front. How much of a role, does your team take in like counseling him on advice on when to evacuate, when to anticipate? And I can't remember what my follow-up question is, so we'll just go with that.
So, Harris County, Houston specifically, is really kind of blessed to have a lot of meteorological expertise. You've got the TV broadcasters, which really do a fine job. And then you've got Jeff Lindner, who does a phenomenal job forecasting for the county, forecasting around bayous and what the flooding situation is going to be. And he gets that message out to the government. So, because he works for the government, so he is working within Harris County to explain all these things to people. So it's great that they're there. But everybody likes, what I've learned is that everybody, even your most loyal followers, like to shop around for forecasts. Which I think about it and I kind of laugh. And I'm like, I used to do that too as a kid. When there was going to be a snowstorm, I would go to channel 3, 6, and 10. What are they all saying? And then I can make my own forecast based on that, or at least set my expectations. I think that's what people do a lot. And even some people in government do. And we've had conversations with people in different agencies across the Houston area that use our site. They use it as part of their weather understanding and their preparations for decision making. We kind of view it as being everybody's kind of on one team as a meteorologist, National Weather Service meteorologists. They're working independently, and broadcasters. We're all trying to get the same message out to people. And how we do it may differ, but we all have the same end goal. And people will find what they like, and they'll use it the way they want. And it's always nice to hear from someone that is, official in an agency or something, saying like, hey, y'all were really good during the storm. Thanks for all the stuff. Which we've heard from a few people from time to time. And it may not be, it may just be like a local fire department or a local police department that just wants information, that, sort of like down the rung of getting the information from the top, that'll really kind of rely on us. And those are kind of the people we really want to help, because they're the ones that kind of don't always get the attention that maybe they need. They're just expected to be there and be ready. But they want to know what's going on too. So we try to help everybody, but if we can help out local officials in any way, that's awesome.
You said a couple of things. You talked about how in a crisis, like the time is even more precious. And so how you communicate it is important. Do you or people that do what you do in this lane do any special kind of training? Like we know about crisis training in terms of communications. Is there any of that happens so that the people in your line of work, the experts, are able to communicate more effectively and efficiently, especially during a crisis?
You'd be surprised that the answer is not really, or at least it never was. I never had anything. Most people I know have never had any real like formal training in anything. But what we're seeing now, there's a couple of people that graduated as meteorologists that are now working in emergency management roles across the country, either as EMs or as people within the EM agency doing outreach work and doing plans and development for the rest of the agency. And it's actually kind of taken on its own branch of meteorology, particularly as I want to say in the last 5 to 8 years or so, as some of these emergency management agencies recognize how critical and how valuable it is to have somebody more in-house, because the National Weather Service does a great job, and the National Weather Service can't be everywhere at once. They've moved into more decision support for larger agencies and larger events, which has been really helpful. But having, again, that expertise in-house really helps some of these EM agencies. If you get somebody that understands both weather and EM, like that is fantastic. I've learned a little bit kind of from just talking to people and from taking a couple of the FEMA certification courses and stuff like that, which I've been asked to do. But we're getting to a point where I think that's going to become more of a track that you can take in college if you want to come out and be a meteorologist, and that you can take some of these classes that will prepare you more for crisis situations and crisis management. And obviously that would extend beyond the scope of just weather. But it's good information to have, even if that's going to be your focus is weather all the time, because you just, again, like you said, you just need to be able to be sharp. I'm fortunate in that I'm kind of like, I get how to communicate a lot. Like it just kind of comes natural to me, which like I don't like saying, but that's just how it is. And so anything I've done has kind of been learned myself or just inherent. But we do need more of this formal training for people, because not everybody gets that naturally. And the more scientists that can communicate, we really saw this during COVID, the more scientists that can communicate effectively, really effectively, the better. And then you won't have, as much drama as, some events give.
You have your website, and then you have some of the social media platforms. I loved your post the other day where, hey, the dew point's lower, so it's not going to feel as bad or possible. Do you customize your message or your tone or any sort of thing? Like we're on the Business Communicators, you see our different ones on there, different snippets, or do you basically use the same message across all platforms?
I try to use the same message, but I do try and tweak it. Like I understand that like people on Instagram's gotten wonky, because I think some people will scroll their feed, but some people really just look at stories, like, and that's what they look at. So I recognize now, like, okay, I can't just post a post on Instagram. I also have to post a story and have like just a little tagline as to what's going on, and then, hey, here's the link to the site. I learned that Twitter, some people ask more actually insightful, in-depth questions. Like I've built a pretty loyal Twitter following of people and I know what they're going to ask and get really some interesting questions. So like I try to give a little bit more information in a little bit shorter time. I've tried to do more threads as time's gone on, just to explain certain things. Like the storms that we've had recently here in Houston have come sort of as a surprise to a lot of people. That could have been a Twitter thread, but instead I decided, you know what, this is worthy of a post because this is going to appeal to a lot more people. And so like I think about it and all right, what is today's weather story going to appeal to? Who needs to hear about this? We always do Facebook. Facebook's been our biggest driver of growth. I don't know if that's still the case today, but long term it certainly has been. And now it's Facebook and word of mouth that's kind of helped. But Twitter's weird because I don't know how much time to invest in there because I don't know where it's going and I don't know how the audience is evolving. So that's made things a little bit interesting. I really like Instagram because it's just a little bit kinder, friendlier environment, and I can be whatever. I can be silly one day. I can be serious. People like different things on there. And I just started with the Eyewell getting into TikTok, and I have no idea what works well on there, whether it's more long form or short form. Like I want to be serious. I want to educate people, but at the same time, I know that's not necessarily why people are on TikTok. So you have to think about kind of what is that audience and who is that audience. But ultimately, what we want to do is, as a site, we want to reach people where they are because we know that the news ecosystem is so diverse now, and people go wherever to get their information. So we have to kind of learn, what works on different sites, or else we're just never going to get an audience because we're too one-track minded. You can't be anymore. You have to be diverse in terms of where you're appealing to.
And that's a lesson for all communicators, right? Like the same message isn't going to work on all platforms. You've got to customize it. You've got to tailor it to your audience. Facebook, the demographics might shade a little bit older than TikTok. And so how do you communicate to different generations? That's something to also consider. But, it's been unseasonably warm this summer. And, the Houston Chronicle actually, a little bit. The Houston Chronicle actually reported on June 28th, so that's the day that we're recording, that on Tuesday of this week, Texas electricity demand likely surged to its highest point ever, which is insane if you think about it. And that's the kind of summer that we're already having. And if you're not from Houston, we typically don't have this prolong of, 100 plus, 110 plus heat indexes for this long, at least not until August, September. I mean, I think back to when I was in 7th grade and then going back to like 2011, just unseasonably warm late years. But as a result, we've seen the tropics kind of heat up a little bit earlier than normal this year. Kind of walk us through, the hurricane season, kind of what we're going through right now with El Niño, the heat dome, here in Texas and parts of Mexico, and kind of what our listeners can expect throughout the rest of the summer months, both within Texas, but more broadly. And then also, if they are kind of building up a preparedness kit for hurricane season, what should they look for?
Yeah, so this summer has been weird, to put it mildly. It has been a strange start to the year. We had a June where, yes, we've had heat in Texas, but we also had a jet stream pattern that was more reminiscent of like mid-spring. So it was almost like we were getting like a mid-spring type setup in a summer air mass, which I think really contributed to, sort of the surge in humidity. Because usually in the summertime, winds start to lighten up a little bit. You get a little bit, everything's sort of more stabilized. There's less push of this warm air off the Gulf because the air was already warm. The water's already warmed up. So, everything kind of stabilizes back to like kind of a happy medium. Whereas this month has just been like off the charts crazy. And, what we're going to see is this heat in Texas will start to break down a little bit as we go into next week, I hope. And then I do think at some point in, call it mid-July, we're going back to this. Whether it's this hot or a little bit less hot, we'll see. But you're right. I mean, usually it's late summer. August is like hell month in Houston. And the last 2 years, it's been June. And it's not that abnormal to have really hot, humid summers during El Niños. This is sort of another level. So El Niño, for those that may not fully understand, it's just when the water in the Pacific Ocean around the equator gets warm. And what that tends to do is kind of create like just a warmer overall atmosphere globally, which is not necessarily what we need right now, but whatever, it is what it is. And so we see sometimes that the southern plains is more hot and more humid. Also, it's usually wetter, but that's more of a fall to spring type thing. So, in theory, we should be wetter in Texas come this fall. So maybe that means we'll have a cooler, earlier start to autumn, but it's a long way off. We'll see. In terms of hurricane season, what it does is, because the water's so warm there, the winds tend to be a little bit stronger over the warmer water, and that blows from west to east. And that will increase the trade winds from the Pacific to the Atlantic, which increases wind shear in the Atlantic. Wind shear is not good for hurricanes. It tends to rip them apart or prevent them from forming without some sort of disruption. So it tends to keep a lid on things a little bit. We saw that with the storms that we've seen so far this month, Arlene, Brett, and Cindy, that have developed but have struggled. They reach a point and then they start to succumb to the shear or the dry air. So hopefully that's what we see more of this hurricane season. I can handle a season with 25 named storms, but if they're all like these, great. Those will be generally more low impact. Typically El Niño summers are lower hurricane summers. And we'll see if that happens. The challenge this year is that the Atlantic Ocean through the Gulf, the water temperatures are so incredibly warm. Some of the warmest on record in the Eastern Atlantic. So we're going to be fighting that all season as well. So you've got this tug of war between the El Nino, which should weaken storms, and the warm water, which helps storms. And we'll see what happens. At this point, we expect kind of an average season, which is about 15 storms or so, with 6 or 7 hurricanes and a couple major hurricanes tossed in. What I like to tell people is that one of the quietest hurricane seasons on record was 1983, when Hurricane Alicia hit Houston. But if you look at the whole basin, it was a quiet season, but not for Houston. 1992 was also a very quiet season overall, but we had Hurricane Andrew. So you've got these lessons from the past. So it's important for people to be prepared every year, no matter what we say. I hate seasonal forecasts because sometimes I think it lulls people into complacency, but always have at least a few days of non-perishable food. I always tell people, try to keep your gas tank above half full, just in case something happens and you got to get out of town. It's good to have bottled water for several days. I think the risk that people need to be aware of, and we saw this recently with thunderstorms here, is that if power goes out, it can go out for a long time. And behind hurricanes, it ain't cool in Texas. It's hot. So you need to be prepared to live without power for perhaps up to 2 weeks. We saw that with Hurricane Ike. A lot of people without power for 10 to 14 days. You have to be ready for that. So whatever you need to do to get ready, do that. Have your documents in place if you have to get out of town. Have a plan ready now for how you're going to leave, and who you're going to take, what your child care plans are going to be, what your pet care plans are going to be. All these things you got to think about. Do it now so that when the time comes, you're not stressing even more than you have to be.
I think that's also really good advice too for people that don't live in hurricane areas. We've seen a lot of wildfires that have been taking place in Canada. California has those seasonally. So I think that's just good advice. Be prepared for any type of situation that unfortunately would force you to leave your home.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing we've noticed a lot in recent years, and that we want people to really just be aware of. Houston could flood one day. You just have to be prepared to deal with those consequences and prepare for what hazards may affect you.
I do have a question, kind of a follow-up, but also changing topics ever so slightly. Is you named all these storms. We talk about the different namings of Supercell Sandy. We talk about the El Nino. We talk about the tax day floods, depending on what part of the world you are, fires. What is the logic? And I know I can Google this, but I want to get it from an expert. What is the logic behind naming storms?
Yeah, in Europe, they actually name heat waves, and they name regular storms over there too. That doesn't have to be tropical systems. It's actually kind of weird, but there's a method to that, and it's because when you name these storms, it tends to resonate more with people, and it almost gives them like a personality, so that people will understand that they have to be ready for this, ferocious storm. Like you say the word Harvey to anyone in Houston, and they're going to recognize that that's not a great name. And I think what happened was at some point in time, people realized that, the great storm of 1887 probably wasn't going to stick. It's a little bit easier to remember someone's name. When they started naming hurricanes, they just named them originally, I think the phonetic alphabet was like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Easy, etc. And then they started formally naming them with human names, and it was all female names. And obviously that wasn't going to, stick too well with a lot of people. And so that they started to, I think it was in the 70s, and they finally decided, we should probably alternate male to female. And so now you get, storms have names. We like to assign names just to make things memorable, to remember that system, so that when we say it, you know what that means. And a lot of times what we'll do is when a storm is threatening or something like that, we have something to compare it to, like, hey, remember during whatever storm that was, it's going to be kind of like that. And that tends to resonate with people. One of the things I was doing crisis management during Hurricane Sandy with a New York office of Deutsche Bank, where I was at the time. And I was telling them, hey, if you go back and you remember in 1992, there was a big storm in December. It was a big flooding storm. Lower Manhattan flooded. This is going to be like that, but worse. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it just sticks to people when you can provide them that example and just a name or a catchphrase or whatever. It just makes it easier to stick in people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully we don't have any destructive Hurricane Austins, Hurricane Kims, Hurricane Thomases, or Hurricane Matts any time in the near future. But Matt Lanza, we really enjoyed you joining us here on the Business Communicators. And before we let you drop your social handles, which I highly recommend following at Matt Lanza on Twitter. It's a really good account to follow. A lot of personality, weather kind of mixed in there. Before we let you drop those handles, I do want to ask you this other important questions. We do like sports on this podcast. Kim has her Chalk Talk show, very popular. Thomas and I try to integrate, Big 12 talk whenever we can. If we're having this conversation on August 2nd, after the MLB trade deadline, where is Shohei Ohtani playing?
Angels.
Angels?
They're going to keep him, I think. They have to. Like, if you're in contention at this point in the season, you're not going to trade your best player, right? So, but I mean, at the same time, when he becomes a free agent, like, you really have to weigh that. Like, if the Angels keep having the tungsten Armo Doyle treatment, then maybe they do move him. But the way they are sitting here now, like, they're in the mix.
Yeah, most of baseball is, except for the A's and the Royals. But
the A's are already partying up in Vegas, so they're good.
Yeah, exactly. But Matt, all right, now serious talk. For our listeners out there that maybe want to kind of follow you and the work that you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, so obviously spacecityweather.com, the Eyewell.com. If you're in Houston, we have an app, Space City Weather. Just search for that on the App Store or Google Play Store. I am at Matt Lanza on Twitter. I think Matt Lanza WX on Instagram. Not that I really post that much on Instagram. That's more silly stuff. But our Space City Weather site is also there, Space City Weather on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on TikTok. We are the Eyewell. So we're all over the place. Just search for the Eyewell or Space City Weather and you can find us pretty easily. And if you're more interested in some of the business side of work, I'm also on LinkedIn. I try to maintain a pretty not active presence, but I'm there at least. My profile is updated. So,
well, there we go. Well, we'll definitely drop the links to everything that Matt just discussed at the show notes below. So if you're listening on your iPhone right now or Android device, just go ahead and scroll down, click on those, and give them a follow. But Matt Lanza, we really appreciate you for joining us here on the Business Communicators.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. Good talk.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Special thanks to Matt Lanza for joining us on this episode of the Business Communicators. And of course, if you want to follow his work and everything that he's doing with Space City Weather as well as the Eyewell, go ahead and scroll down and on the show notes, and you'll see all of the links there to all of his social media accounts. We strongly encourage you to give him a follow. And if you know anyone in Houston or the Gulf Coast that could potentially be impacted by hurricanes or severe weather this summer, we encourage you to share this podcast with them and also to share his information. It's incredibly valuable. And I just thought it was a fascinating conversation to be able to hear the relationships between crisis communicators, weather meteorologists, and to understand how critical information can be communicated and disseminated in such a timely manner. But special thanks to Matt for joining us. It was a great conversation, and it was good to have Kim and Thomas on this episode of the podcast as well. But if you want to follow our work, just search at Biz Communicator on all of the social media platforms. You'll find us there. You can also visit our website at businesscommunicators.com. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, feel free to send us a DM or you can email us at austin@thebusinesscommunicators.com. On behalf of our guests this week, Matt Lanza, and my co-hosts, Kim Davis and Thomas Bain, my name's Austin Staton. See you next week. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.